In this session, I'd like for us to take a look at Lab 1-2 using the analytics platform Alteryx, and it is freely available to you in our materials section in Blackboard. There is a link that has been provided, and basically you can just click on that, go to their website. There's a little form you fill out and so forth, but my understanding is that you get free access as a student, free access to the basic Alteryx platform for 1 year, and there are other components to it that can possibly be made available. There's a machine learning component, predictive analytics, that as we perhaps would get into forecasting and so forth, those would be special things to add on. But I thought in the context of this course we would gain familiarity with the basic Alteryx platform, and that along with Tableau and Microsoft Power BI / Excel or Excel / Microsoft Power BI. Again, in this course, our textbook has a Microsoft track and a Tableau track. In terms of our point-based homework assignments, we're emphasizing the Microsoft track, but along the way there will be practice labs and videos such as this that are covering some of the other platforms. I would encourage you to get access to the other platforms, Tableau, Alteryx, and work through some of the labs and so forth. But at a minimum, at least watch the videos so that you're familiar with how these additional platforms work, and you'll be equipped to answer questions that might appear on the midterm and final exam related to not just Excel, Microsoft Power BI, but also Tableau and Alteryx. And so I've gotten feedback from our employers, our prominent employers, of usage of each of these platforms. Okay, so there would be, for example, a ConocoPhillips that might use Tableau, whereas Phillips 66 might use Power BI. And I know we've got some CPA firms that use Alteryx. We've received feedback there. And so I think it's good to be familiar with those. I think Phillips 66 indicated that they were using Alteryx as well. So there's basically different employers use sometimes more than one analytics platform, but these seem to be the ones that have kind of risen to the top in terms of basic usage. There are others out there. SAP has their Analytics Cloud, which we do cover in some other courses. There is a statistical analysis package called SAS, Statistical Analysis System, which has its own analytics component. I'm sure SPSS does as well. So it's one of those areas that there seem to be a lot of players, that there are certain items or certain platforms that will naturally rise to the top. And given the tight connection of Power BI to Excel and the prominence of Excel across industries and organization types and so forth, I would expect Power BI to remain at or near the top in terms of platforms. I think Tableau with Salesforce as a Salesforce product is going to also remain prominent. But Alteryx, I think, just in terms of the way it works, and we'll find out it's different in terms of the way you construct analyses through kind of a graphical workflow design approach. I think it's got real staying power as well, and it makes certain things substantially easier, particularly when you kind of get into machine learning and you've got things that are built into Alteryx that are running the platform, the open source language R in the background. In some of our analytics courses we get into actually a little bit of programming with R, but Alteryx has kind of a graphical interface with R that makes that substantially easier. So anyway, so I mentioned the link here, so you can download the software, and thought again we would take a look at Lab 1-2. I guess in the context of this problem, probably Excel is kind of in view being used here. But we will, again, I'll show you how to do effectively the same thing in Alteryx. It's a good starting point for learning Alteryx. And I guess the name comes from alter, A-L-T-E-R, alter, then Y-X, kind of a X scatter graph. You've got a Y-axis, X-axis, and somehow they kind of came up with that and made the name of the software. So it does have some inherent logic in it, I guess, in terms of the name, and a little bit of, like I say, somewhat clever, I think, in terms of deriving the name of the product. But here it says, consider the 2013 rejected loan data from Lending Club, titled DAA Chapter 1-2 Data. Prepare the data set for analysis. To prepare the data set for analysis, let's scrub the risk score data first. Because our analysis requires risk scores, debt to income data, and employment length, we need to make sure each of them has valid data. Okay, and so they tell us to open the file in Excel, sort the file based on risk score, and remove those observations, the complete row or record that have a missing score or a score of 0 if needed. Okay, and so once again, instead of working with this in Excel, we're going to jump into Alteryx. Let me bring up the platform here and kind of show you just basically how this works. You have a canvas. And when you bring this in, for example, I can bring in a blank canvas right here. It's just simply a blank place where you can click and drop certain tools. And the idea is you create a workflow, a flow for your data to go through where you're performing various operations on the data, maybe filtering the data, cleansing the data, sorting the data, merging it with other data. And so there are other things you can do. And so you have across the top here, you have tabs that contain tools of various sorts that you kind of learn to work with as you work through kind of logically through a problem. And like say, you need to cleanse the data or you need to sort it or something, you look for a tool that will serve that purpose. Now those tools are logically grouped here, so there's an in-out section, so you've got tools for input and output operations. Preparation tab that we'll use the tools here a lot because this is where you've got a tool that will sort, a tool that will allow you to calculate new columns, okay, new measures, data cleansing tool, an auto field tool that's really handy for pairing the size of your text fields. There are other binning tools and so forth. Record ID tool that comes in handy if you need to add a column that's got an index, so maybe going from 1 to however many rows you have in a table of data. You've got a tool there for sampling, maybe drawing a random sample from an existing data set. So there's a lot of things here that will be useful. Join is a set of tools that do some, you might say, some basic database type operations. If you've taken a course involving databases, you know that a join operation itself is an operation where you take the columns of maybe table A, selected columns from table A, and you bring along selected columns from table B, and you match those on some common field, some key field or fields within the two tables. But then there's also a union operation where you take one database, you take the rows from one database table, and you take another database table that maybe has a common set of rows, and you bring those together like that. So you're stacking the data that way vertically. And so there are other tools here. Fuzzy match, we'll probably see that a little later on when we're looking to kind of match one column, typically a text column with another text column, where such as addresses, where the address might use like ST for street in one place and STREET for street in another place, and you're looking for similarities and trying to match based upon a certain level of a scoring, a match score. And so we'll see that. Transform is an area we'll use a lot, particularly this summarize tool, but also the cross tab can be used a lot, count records and so forth. So some very good tools in there. There's the reporting tool if we want to create a table or create an interactive chart, we can do that. Those are often used tools, and there are others. You can do some mapping of data, geographic mapping of data with what's in the spatial set of tools. Here's the machine learning, and that kind of ties in with our predictive analytics. So when you get Alteryx, I don't believe you will actually have this set of tools. That's an add-on. They graciously extended these tools to me since I do teach some machine learning and wanted to evaluate the platform for that purpose. A lot of these tools run the language R in the background, and so they're really handy from that standpoint. You don't have to necessarily know R programming to do some of these analyses. You just kind of click and drag, and then you specify your inputs and your outputs, and on you go. And data investigations, kind of another one, kind of ties in with some of our machine learning and advanced analytics. Time series is really kind of a fascinating area they've got here. They've got two levels of time series analysis, what we call ETS, and then ARIMA. And so anyway, predictive grouping, you can do, again, some advanced analyses here that we do in some of our more advanced analytics courses, principal components analysis, and cluster analysis, that kind of thing. So anyway, so the idea here is that you click and drag these tools onto the canvas and create a logical flow of steps, operations to produce your end result. And so you kind of have to know, of course, where you're headed to know and be able to kind of think through what the steps are. But this is one of those things you get good at with practice. Okay, a lot of things, of course, are that way. You'll almost always start a workflow with an input data tool. So just to illustrate, you click and drag onto the canvas, the blank canvas here, and you do a setup connection. You can go to files here, and then you can navigate to your data file. So if you've been provided a data file from a homework assignment in Connect, you can just download the data files that we've got. And this is one, that's that Lab 1-2 data file. You can just click that, and that's you've connected to Excel, and here you specify which sheet within the Excel workbook you want. We don't want the end user license agreement page. There's a page in the file that's got the end user license agreement. We'll just take that reject stats B2013. You can specify the range, cells, rows, and columns that you actually want to bring in. We're just going to bring in the whole thing. So we'll just, with that, just go with OK. And you see it brings in the data here, a view of the data that you can see. And every step along the way, or any point along the way, you can run your workflow. And so it actually executes that input data step. and it will return. You see it kind of in various steps along the way. I'll tell you what the percentage processing is. And so as it comes in, you can see your actual result each step along the way. It turns out to be a very powerful thing because you can actually see what your data is going, what it looks like at each step through the analysis. And that can help avoid errors, as we'll see. And I think that's really an advantage of just like doing a lot of things just straight in SQL or really our other platforms, Power BI and Tableau. You don't always see what's happening in the intermediate steps. You can see the end result. And if the end result doesn't look quite right, that tells you, well, something happened along the way and I might have lost some data or something, okay? But with Alteryx, you can actually go in and each step along the way, you can see like how many records you've got, and did you lose any records along the way? Did you lose any columns of data along the way? And there's other things. Were there any errors that were thrown as a result of a data type misspecification, for example? And so a lot of times what we'll do is kind of follow up the input data step with, I oftentimes like to just look at the data or look at the data types. So you can do that with the select tool. Okay, so in the preparation section, I just clicked and brought that down. And you can see automatically over here the different columns of data in this data set, okay, and what the data types are. And you can actually change the data types here from one type to another, okay. And that sometimes becomes very useful because you'll notice how much storage, internal storage, is being captured by your individual columns within the data, the different attributes. And it might be that, for example, you don't need 255 bytes of storage for zip codes. You don't need 255 bytes of storage for a two-character state designation. Okay, and so you can maybe perhaps manually change that if you wanted to, or there's another tool that will do that for us automatically. So anyway, I just wanted to demonstrate here, basically how you do that. If you didn't need all the columns of data going down through the workflow, for example, we know we don't need loan title and debt to income ratio, perhaps employment length for our particular analysis, whatever it is at hand, then we can simply deselect those and we don't carry that data through the entire workflow. And that's one thing I think neat about Alteryx is that you can really make your analyses run efficiently by just simply not capturing excess storage, not capturing your memory for unnecessarily. Okay, so you run the workflow and you can now see over here, see I paired the data set, I trimmed the number of columns here. So that's what I mean by us being able to look at our data each step along the way. This is the original data set, but after I did selected or actually deselected some of our columns, this is what I've got. Okay, so this is kind of I think really kind of a fun tool to work with, or platform to work with. Now, in the context of our present problem or analysis, let's go back once again and just note they tell us here, let's read through it just briefly. Sort the file based on risk score. Remove those observations, the complete row or record that have a missing score or a score of 0 if needed. Assign each risk score to a risk score bucket similar to the chapter. And back in our chapter, there is a classification that they've applied to credit scores like from 800 above or excellent, from 750 to 800 or good and so forth, and they go all the way down to poor and very poor, I think. anyway, so you can look back in the chapter and see those this little illustration in there they've got with the ranges there. So that's what they want us to do, and then run a pivot table analysis that shows the number of loans in each risk score bucket. Okay. So go back to Alteryx. I've designed this workflow here, and I'll just do a run on it here quickly. You can see the different components as they're running, what the percentage of completion is, and when it finishes running, you get a pop-up message, and there it is right there, finish running. If you have any error messages or warnings, they'll show up here. I didn't have any errors or warnings here. Warnings sometimes are okay. You know that they're, you kind of anticipate and you know what it's about, but errors you have to correct, so. But the output side of this thing is a list of the frequencies or the counts of the different customers or rows within our table that fall into the different risk score buckets. So we had excellent, very good, good, fair, poor, very poor. And perhaps I could have put the score range in here as part of the description. We could have done that. That would have been all right. But anyway, that's the essence of what the analysis is all about. So you kind of have to know where you're headed so that you know how to get there and what path you have to traverse to get there. And there are, like a lot of things, there's more than one way to get to an endpoint. They're not necessarily always equally as good, okay, because one method might be more efficient than another, but I'll show you what I put together here, and along the way you might find a different way to get to the same result, okay? And just kind of have to compare and decide which is the best. But recall what I said, that you almost always start a workflow with the input data tool. So there's the input data tool, and we kind of click it and drag it down here, and once again what you do is you configure that particular tool. See, as you click on each tool, you get the configuration screen for each tool. But back here, you do a setup connection. Okay, go to Files, select File, you navigate to your particular file, and open that. Okay, and then I showed you just a moment ago how within that you can choose the particular worksheet within the Excel workbook that you want to bring in, and if you need to change that, you can do that right down here. Okay, but you'll see the path for your data file right up here. And so again, that's the setup connection. You do all that. You basically specify the worksheet that you want. It gives you a preview of the data here. Okay, and it shows you just the first 100 records over here. On the output side of this, though, you'll see after you've run the workflow, and again, you can run it at each step. Every time you add a tool in here, you can rerun the workflow and see exactly what you're dealing with in terms of your output. It's important, I think, to kind of keep track of the number of records along the way that you're dealing with here. And for example, you can see right here on the output side of this is all of our data, and there's a total of 669,993 rows of data. So it's a fairly large data set. Okay, well, again, I oftentimes will, as just a very next step, bring in a select statement. And so the select statement is in the preparation area. Okay, bring that in here, and you can configure that. Now, for the purpose of this analysis, right now I left everything selected, but in reality, all I really need here is the risk score. Okay, and I'm not interested in the amount of the loan, the application date, the loan title. So I could deselect these, okay? And I could deselect them at this level. For illustration purposes, I kind of wanted to leave them in there just to show you another tool here that we can also use. And it's where we have these text fields, and they'll be labeled something string, okay, a variable string and so forth. But you'll see that you kind of by default, you've got these string fields or character fields that are capturing 255 bytes of data. And that oftentimes is overkill. And so there is another tool, which is this autofill tool, which is a good thing to kind of learn to use. So just kind of click it and bring it down here, and when you bring the tool in, get it in the proximity here, it will connect here to this node. So there's the output node. This was the input node of this select tool. This is the output node. When we bring this in, and what this does, I'll just hover over this and a little descriptor will pop up here, I think, or it should. The autofill. There you go. I'll just kind of click on it there. Automatically set the field type for each string field to the smallest possible size and type that will accommodate the data in each column. Okay, so it automatically here, as I connect to this, it automatically detected the fields in my data that are of string type. Okay, and so it's detected the loan title, the zip code, and the state. And I want it to basically replace the data type, or at least pair the number of bytes assigned to each field to the minimum number that will accommodate the data in that field. This tool does that automatically. Okay, and so if I just bring to the right of this another select tool, okay, what I can see is that it has worked on the string fields, changed the data type in certain cases, and then also paired the number of bytes of data that's needed to store that information. So go back over here. This took 255, zip code 255, state 255. Here we'll see that that's been paired from 255 to 40. State or zip code's been paired from 255 to 5. And state's been paired from 255 to 2. Okay. All right, so that greatly reduces the amount of your memory that you carry forward through the analysis. Okay. And so you're kind of freeing up memory at that point. And so again, that's a useful thing to do. I didn't necessarily have to do that in this case because I don't really need those fields anyway for the analysis at hand. I could have just simply deselected those back here, and I wouldn't have had to worry about changing their data type since I don't really need those. And actually, right here, for purposes of what happens on down the way here, I don't need any of this stuff here. So I'll just deselect it. Okay. The risk score I do need. I don't need the debt to income ratio, the zip code, the state, the employment length, the policy code. Okay. So I can actually just get rid of all that, deselect it. And as I do that, actually my runtime will go down. Because once again, I kind of free up some memory in my computer and things will run more efficiently. So you might notice here that on the output side of this, then, I just have my risk score. Okay, there was the input side. There, all that kind of came in. The output side of this, I just have the risk score. Notice in terms of my final result, I still get the final result. The little table of has the count by risk score bucket. One of the things they wanted us to do, though, was to get rid of any rows of data where the risk score is null or 0. All right, so some of this is just to kind of illustrate some of these tools. Back here in the preparation section, you will see a data cleansing tool right here. You can click and bring that in here, connect it right here, and you can indicate from this the particular fields that you want to examine for null values. We can click remove nulls, okay, null rows, and within the risk score column. So if you have multiple columns here, you can do this on multiple fields. There isn't really an option here to necessarily filter those that have a 0 risk score. Okay, so that requires another step, but this will remove the nulls for us quite readily. Okay, so as we might notice here, along the way here, I'm bringing in a second tool here, which is in the transform area. It's a count records tool. Now I can tell right here, just by looking at the output side of this, I've still got 669,993 records. That's one way of kind of keeping track of how many records I have. But if you attach the count records tool each step along the way, or some strategic steps along the way, you can see how many rows of data you have at this point, how many rows of data you have at this point, at this point. You can click the output side of this, and you can see quite readily if you've lost any data along the way. Okay. Or if you've added data, that becomes a problem sometimes because you wind up duplicating data. If you do a join operation, sometimes you can wind up with duplicate rows if the join is misspecified. Okay, so that's another thing. You can actually wind up with more rows than you anticipated, and that distorts your end result, your table, and so forth at the end. So keeping track of the number of rows of data that you've gotten and determining whether it meets your expectation at each step along the way is fairly important. Okay. So we'll just notice here that we really didn't, through this cleansing step, lose any observations. That all goes to say that there were no risk scores in here that were null. Okay. But had there been, we would have wound up with a smaller number here. We would be able to determine how many rows of data we lost as a result of cleansing, removing the rows with null data. Now, the other thing we wanted to look at was whether remove any rows where the risk score is 0. Now, probably the best way to do that is with another preparation tool, and this is the filter tool. The filter is going to be one of your biggest friends along the way in a lot of analyses. So you'll have one input node. You'll notice that you've got two output nodes, a T node and an F node, which obviously stands for true and false. So you specify a condition here upon which you want to filter the data, or you want to utilize to filter the data. If the condition is true, the records that meet that particular filter definition get channeled this direction. The records that don't meet the condition get channeled this direction. And that's oftentimes a handy thing. You might have to do separate things with the output, both sets of outputs, and so you've got those readily available. So let's look at the configuration of the tool here. So you'll see that you can do a basic filter, a custom filter. I generally just do the basic filter. I choose the particular column upon which I want to filter the data, which was the risk score, and I said I want risk score greater than 0. Okay, Any row where the risk score is greater than 0, that's a true condition. The data gets channeled off this way. Any row that doesn't meet that condition, the row of data gets channeled off this way. And you could attach the count record to each side of this if you wanted to, and see how many records you actually have there. And I'll just do that kind of quickly to illustrate that and rerun. Okay. You have to rerun the data flow for it to update everything along the way. And so again, it can take a minute or two to run more complex workflows. This won't take all that long. Looks like we're done now. And that just says that, well, okay, look here on this count tool, 669,993. So every row in the table had a risk score that was greater than 0. If you look here on the output side of this, the count is 0. So off the false node, there were 0. Okay, and if I wanted to do this, if we had some that actually didn't meet the condition and wound up here on the false side, then if I had some other analysis I wanted to do on those items would be available for me. From here, I'm just working off of the true node, those 669,663 or whatever it was, or 669,993. And the next thing I wanted to do was basically add a couple of columns to my data. If I look right here, this is what my data looks like off the true side of this filter tool. Just got a single column of data. I want to add a couple of columns, and these are, you might say, calculated columns because they're based on the risk score. I wanted to add a risk score bucket, which is a number going from 1 to probably 6, where 1 is excellent, 2 is very good, I think, and 3 is good, and so forth. So kind of meeting the definition of those ranges that we had provided in our textbook. And then based upon that risk score bucket, I wanted to add a risk score bucket description, because ultimately in my table I've got the risk score bucket description, and then I've got the count of the rows that appear there. Okay, so I've got this this formula tool. It's up here in the preparation section, and again, this is going to be one of your biggest friends if you're working with Alteryx. Just like in Power BI, where you add a calculated column or a measure, or Tableau where you kind of do the same sort of thing, this is the tool you use to add calculated columns and so forth in to your analysis. And so the configuration of this, just mention here what you can do is if you want to add a column, you can go to the plus and you do a add column, okay, and then you can specify the formula upon which the new column will be calculated. Okay, so what I did was I added 2 columns. The first one was the risk score bucket, and this has a nested if structure to it. We go over that, say in the Excel side of this particular lab and Tableau side. So it's a very common structure. You've probably done this in Excel, but you've got a basic if statement. Here in Alteryx, it's an IF statement. That's fairly commonplace in different platforms. Instead of it just being if, it'll be IF. But it has 3 parts. The first is the condition that you want to test. It's a Boolean condition and returns a true or false. And then depending upon whether the condition evaluates to true, you'll do something specified in the as the next parameter. If it's false, then you do something else. So you've got a 3-part structure there. This is the Boolean condition we're testing first. Is the risk score greater than or equal to 800? If it is, we're going to assign the number 1. If it's not greater than 800, it's greater than some other relevant value, but we need to determine which it happens to be. So the false side of this is really the rest of all of this, but we can then embed in the false side of that first if statement another if statement or another if statement that has its own three parts to it. So we next test whether the risk score is greater than or equal to 750. If it is, we'll assign the value 2. If it is not, well, let's do another if statement, another three-part if statement where we test whether the risk score is greater than 700. If it is, we assign the value 3. If it is not, then we do another if statement, a three-part if statement. So this, again, is kind of the false part of this particular if statement right here. But we test whether the risk score is greater than or equal to 650. If it is, we assign the value 4. If not, let's test again. Is it greater than or equal to 600? If it is, we assign the value 5. If it is not, it's going to be in our lowest risk category, which is going to be 6. So that's the final false component of our final if statement. Okay, it's the false component of our final if statement. And you've got 5 parentheses, right parentheses here to close each of these if statements. Okay. And notice that you wind up with the number of parentheses here being one less than the final number of buckets, you might say, that we are assigning to our data. Okay, well, having determined that, added this column called risk score bucket, I can then use that result in another column. So I added another column and just simply called this risk score bucket description. So you just simply type in what you want it to be here. And so I called this one risk score bucket, this one risk score bucket description. I could have used a nested if structure here like I did up here. But there's another tool that's a little more efficient, and I wanted to illustrate that. So that's the switch tool. It operates kind of the same. It's got basically a value that we want to look at, okay? And we want to look at the risk score bucket, whatever number we assign to a particular row in this, with this, this statement. And kind of like in the opposite manner in what we did, over here we had our final default value. Our default value is the very last thing we specified here. That will be the very first thing you specify as your second parameter here. What is your default value? Well, it's going to be very poor. That's what attaches to group 6. Then we say, well, basically, if risk score bucket is 1, we'll attach the descriptor excellent to it. If it's 2, very good. 3, good. 4, fair. 5, and then poor. So you see that if it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's obviously going to be 6, but we don't have to say that here. We just say if it's not one of those others, it's very poor. Okay, and that will assign those descriptors over here. So it's based on the risk score bucket, the number here, but it attaches a descriptor. And so as you run this and so forth on the output side of this, once again, we've got our risk score, the original data that we brought into this tool, but we've added these 2 columns of data. We've still got 669,993 rows of data on the output side of this. So all that is good, okay? Well, now we've got this data that has all of our rows of, our 669,993 records with the risk scores, the risk score buckets, and so forth, the descriptions. We now want to start aggregating the data. And that is where this summarize tool comes in very handy. So this will be one of the more frequently used tools. And so you just, again, click and drag it down and connect it here. Okay, it will connect kind of automatically if you bring it in the vicinity. Otherwise, you can click and drag from one node to the next. Okay, but what you do here is you highlight a row here, and then you use an operation here to specify what you want to do. We want to group our data by the risk bucket and the risk bucket description. It means we're going to roll it up by, or aggregate it by risk bucket. And so I brought in risk score first. Okay, risk score bucket first. Yeah, actually, so it's here, risk score bucket. Brought that in first. And I chose the group by right there. Okay, so when I did that, it automatically adds this down here. And I can actually change the output field name here as if I want to. Okay. And there are several places along the way if you want to change the name of a field, you can do so. You can certainly do that in the select select operations back here. You can rename the field if you want to. Okay, you can do that, add a description, that kind of thing. But back in our summarize tool, this is another place where it will automatically, for some things, kind of attach a field name, and you can modify it if you want to. Okay. So I also wanted to retain the risk score bucket description, and so I brought that in as another group by. So I selected that, added group by. Okay. And then I wanted to bring in the risk score, and I wanted to count how many falls into each bucket. Each of these roll-up levels. So these are basically the same in terms of aggregation. So I select risk score, and then I select count. And that will return to me the count of the rows that fall into each risk bucket. Okay, so you'll see on the output side of this, if you go to the right side here and click on that, this is the output side. It's rolled up that 669,993 rows of data into 6 rows of data where I've got the risk score bucket, the risk score bucket description, and then the count of the rows that fall into each risk score bucket. Exactly what I'm needing, except for maybe the sorting of this. Okay, and I also kind of like to add a total to this as well. So that's the output side of that. So to sort the data, I kind of branch off 2 different ways here. I'll kind of indicate here why. Is I want to add a total to this, another row as a total, and that's going to require me to use my summarize tool again, okay, on this output to basically aggregate this set of rows to get a total. All right, but I also want, in my final result, I want the risk score bucket sorted from 1 to 6. Okay, so there is a sort tool. So I kind of go off 2 different directions here, and then I kind of pull it back together here, if you'll kind of notice. The workflow goes off this way, I do something, goes off this way, I do something, and then I kind of pull it back together right here. Okay, so let's look at this. In the preparation section, there is a sort tool. I click and drag down. It's very easy to use. Configure it. It'll automatically, bring in the rows upon which you might sort the data, or you can select those. I want to sort on the risk score bucket, so I just selected that, and I want to sort ascending, so you can choose ascending or descending there. And you can sort on multiple fields if you want to sort within that on another field and so forth. Sort by alphabetically another field within that outer sort, then you can do that. So you can do multiple level sorts here. All I needed for this purpose was to sort this data, and so you'll notice on the output side of this, okay, the input side, this is what I had. So keep your eye on the risk score bucket. The output side, I've got the data sorted by risk score bucket. Okay. The main reason I had this as a calculated column was so that I could sort the data in this order. If I try to sort alphabetically, it's not going to give me what I want because very good's going, very poor and very good are going to show up at the end, and excellent, I guess, at the beginning, as as I would want, but it doesn't give me what I want if I just to sort this alphabetically. I wanted it to go from excellent, very good, good, fair, poor, and very poor. So that's why I actually had the risk score bucket as a calculated column. Don't really need it after that, and you'll see I kind of drop it off along the way here because in my final result I don't have the risk score bucket. Okay. All right, so that kind of covers what I do with that branching there. Now I go back up to here off this way, and I use my summarize tool again from the transform section. And what I do here is I bring in each of my columns, the risk score bucket and the risk score bucket description. I needed to retain those for the moment because what I'm going to do is a merge operation here. And I need the same columns between the two data sets that I'm going to merge. So I have to keep these in here. So I've got the risk score bucket. I just brought it in with the first operation, okay? And I could have used anything there probably because what I'm going to do is basically replace it with a null, you'll see here. But I also brought in the risk score bucket description, chose first here, could have chose last or something there, it didn't matter because once again this is something I'm just going to replace with a null. What I'm really interested in is the count, okay? So I brought in the count, and then with that I basically said give me the sum of my fields, okay? So that's what I really want, is I want the sum of these items. So this is the input side of that summarize tool. I want to sum these, okay? And so I brought that in with the sum selection. So highlight that, choose sum, it brings it in there, okay? You can change your output names here and so forth. I followed that up with another formula tool here in the preparation section, brought formula in here, and you'll see on the output side of this, it chose the value of the very first record in my data set as the value to return for risk score bucket and then for risk score bucket description. Because if you go back here, you'll see that's the very first row I had in here, for and fair, okay? And I brought in here first. So what I had here was for, fair, but then I got the total, the count, 669,993, exactly the number I wanted. I knew all the way along the way here I had 669,993 rows of data. I didn't lose any of them along the way, so that's exactly what I wanted, but I wanted that total to appear in my final result here, this total here. So this is all about generating that total. So what I want to do here is replace this risk score bucket for and this risk score bucket fair with just blanks, okay? Make them null. Okay, so what I can do here is I just, instead of adding a column, I choose risk score bucket and say null. You got left parenthesis, right parenthesis. Risk score bucket description. Actually, I wanted to replace that with the word total. Instead of making it null, I just wanted to replace fair with total. And so I, in single quotes, typed in total. Okay. And so you see on the output side of this, what I get is I still have my column here, risk score bucket, but it's null. I've got risk score bucket description, but it's got total. Then I've got the 669,993, which is the total number of rows of data that I have. So I've got that as a data set, and on the output side of this, I've got this as a data set. So notice that you've got the same columns with the same descriptions, risk score bucket description, and count. Risk score bucket description, and count. I want to bring those two together, but I want to do so that the rows from this data set appear first, and this one logically appears at the bottom as my total. So in the join section, there is this union tool. You kind of click and bring it in here, and I would say don't try to join it, connect it automatically. Just kind of leave it out here, and then you can click and drag from this data set first. That's important because it's going to bring that in first. You'll notice it's labeled number 1, and then you click and drag to the input side of this union tool from here to here. That will bring that in next. Okay, and so when you do that, you'll have it in this order where you've got your risk score buckets 1 through 6 here, and then you've got the total 6. If you did this in opposite order, your total would be up here at the top. And there may be cases where you'd want to do that, but that's how you do it. It's just the order in which you connect these that establishes what is 1 and what is 2. Okay. So on the output side of this is what we've got. Okay. Well, now it's a matter of just kind of making it, you might say, more of a formal presentation. So we've got our reporting area here. There's a table tool. You click and drag that down, connect it here, so the output of this becomes the input here. And you can select and deselect various fields that you want. I no longer needed the risk score bucket. I just wanted the risk score bucket description, so I deselected that. There's other things you can do here in terms of centering the values and so forth. I can also add a bar graph based on the risk score bucket or the count here. Might base it on the count. Okay, and so that will generate a table, but it will not be a table that you can directly look at. To look at the result, you've got to attach to it a browse tool. So the browse is in the in-out section. Click and drag it down, and you'll use that quite a bit. Anytime you're typically using something in the reporting section, you typically need to follow it with a browse tool. Okay, so I'll rerun this this workflow here, and again, it'll take a minute to run perhaps. And it will run faster if I'm not running video recording software on my machine, but obviously I have to do that to capture that here. It tells you how long it took to run. I'm sure if I were to turn off my video recording and run this again, it'd probably run in half the time, you know. So anyway, so again, on the output side of the table tool, all you get's this basically, and then if you do the browse tool, you get the count, and then I showed you how basically you would add that little graph, set of graphs here, bar graphs here. So if you don't want that, then just deselect it and run it again. Okay, and there would be times when you want that, and I think some of our lessons down the way we kind of do some. We'll use like spark lines in Excel, and it's kind of the same sort of thing. A little graph we add on each row of our output and so forth. Another thing we can use quite a bit, or we will use a lot, is the interactive tool, but the interactive chart tool, and I'll show you how you use that perhaps in another lesson.